Hey everyone, I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and welcome to episode 79. Okay, then, hey folks, welcome back to the weekly Ratchet. And as always, hope you've had a fantastic week of getting to play games with family and or friends. Right, that's I remember how to do this. I know what I'm doing. It's the afternoon, and I probably shouldn't be filming. I'm pretty tired, but the show must go on. And speaking of the show, last night I went to a concert of my favorite band, Mariana's Trench. They performed in Montclair, New Jersey, which is 5 to 5.5 hours from here. And they went on stage last night at 9 p.m. And we had to get home, work and school. So yeah, we got home at 3:30 in the morning. So yeah, it's I'm a little tired. I did get a little bit of sleep. I think I'm doing okay. We'll see how this episode goes. But yes, I did go see my favorite band last night, and viewers who have been around for a long time might remember that I saw them last year around very, very end of September, early October. In fact, almost exactly a year ago, when they performed in Philadelphia, which is closer than Montclair, New Jersey. That was when my parents kind of got stuck with us for a good month after those hurricanes came through, or that hurricane came through in North Carolina. So I went to go see my favorite band, and it was an absolutely fantastic show, and it was made even more fantastic by this. This is Mariana's Trench lead singer Joshua Ramsey, also the lead songwriter for the band. He's quite an accomplished musician and songwriter. He's done a number of hit singles for bands like Nickelback. He co-wrote Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. He's got a lot of street cred, and you'll see him here in this image playing a Fender Telecaster, this blue and white guitar that he has here, which is the same Telecaster that you see right here. Yes, this is the actual guitar from those photos. Folks may remember that back in June, we had to sell our cabin, and a little bit of a downtime for us, and as a little bit of a consolation gift to myself, I bought Diamond VIP passes to that show. So, we got there before the show with a handful of other Gold VIP members. We got to kind of have a little Q&A session with the band, kind of chat and hang out, got pictures with them. Also got first, dibs on the merch booth. But then my wife, daughter, and I kind of peeled off. We ended up going backstage to a green room and hung out with three members of the band. Mike Ailey, their bass guitarist, is out with a back injury for probably the rest of the tour. Hopefully he'll be okay. But anyways, yeah, so we got to hang out, and they autographed this guitar. They let us know what song it would be played in, so I could get some pictures of it. And then at the end of the show, they passed it to us in front of everybody in this giant box that they had wrapped it up in for us. So yeah, this was something I've been looking forward to for a couple of months, with the caveat knowing, of course, that we were going to be getting in very, very late in the morning. But that is okay. This was worth it. It was a fantastic experience. Sorry, I gotta stop talking away from the microphone. And I'm wearing a shirt that I picked up to wear to the show. Anyways, because of that, and also because of some work travel I had this week, I've gotten to play some games, but not quite as many as I'd hoped. I am also actually pleased to report that I have no new games that have come in this week, not as a result of any of the costs that I paid on that, as I paid that months ago. But I was just trying to avoid getting any more games. The past episodes, I've gotten a ton of stuff in. I think I've probably offset everything that I've managed to sell or trade off lately. And I have just as many, if not more, games than I did a good 2 months ago. So anyways, yeah, we're going to have an episode today. We're going to see how it goes. Let's start off with Question of the Week. All right, last week I asked you to tell me about a game night experience that went completely off the rails, completely as unplanned. And a couple of good answers here. Up first was Rentless, who recapped a game night where they started a game of Brass Birmingham at about 8 p.m. after watching a half-hour rules video and finished at 1 a.m. after getting a bunch of rules wrong, including when he himself built a canal on a route that only allowed for a railroad, giving him an accidental win. I think it's probably safe to say that we've all been there in some capacity. I can think of a game that I played at the 2021 Dice Tower Retreat. It was late in the evening. I think we started around 10:30 or 11, maybe even later than that. And I sat down with a couple who I've continued to keep in touch with and game with over the years. But we played Gaia Project. And I said, yeah, I played this. I think I could explain this game. Only to then kind of realize I'd only played it solo, and it had been a while, and I had actually no recollection of how to play that game, and we just stumbled through it, playing everything wrong possible. Luckily, I did not win that game. I was last place by a considerable margin, although we really have no idea if we got the scores right, because I know we goofed up so many rules as we were getting through that game. It happens, though, and Rentless did go on to say that he had a good play of Brass Birmingham later on. So, all things come to a positive end, right? Wayne Kruger recently returned from a local convention where he intended to play several new games, but often ended up having to restart games when additional players would show up to join in. As a result, he ended up playing fewer games several times. I've seen that now. A lot of the games that you mentioned were like Flip 7 and some kind of like social or party games. We've certainly had times where, you're teaching a game, you're almost done, and someone says, "Oh, can I grab this last seat real quick?" And you're going, "Oh, I really don't want you to, but I don't want to be mean. So sure, we'll reteach everything all over again." And then you're sitting there going, "God, are we still playing this?" Oh, that's right, because I had to basically teach it twice at the beginning. So yeah, familiar with that experience as well. CR Poll lamented a game night where they intended to play a dungeon crawler, which no one ended up caring for, and instead played a silly team session of Stratego. Good old Stratego. I was playing that when I was very, very young. As actually part of like a counseling thing that I did when I was a child. And I think I still have a copy somewhere. I think it's tucked up here in the back of a shelf somewhere. I've never played any more than a two-player game. I've only ever played it two players. I didn't even know that was an option. Jeremy Brooks said that social deduction games have been the cause of several game nights going off the rails, often resulting in more disagreements and unhappiness than anything else, adding that these games rarely hit the table anymore. Yeah, I tell you, I know that those deduction games are very popular. No qualms with that, of course, but I have just never really found one that I truly enjoy. Jeremy made the comment about, people arguing that, oh, you're playing that role wrong. I feel like in those deduction games, you're all kind of told, okay, here's the general idea of the game, and here's sort of what we're trying to do, go. And there's no chance for people to really sort of understand and interpret, maybe see some sort of a guide or suggestions or something on how to play their role. I kind of feel like we're often just kind of, thrown into these environments, sort of caution to the wind, right? And everyone's kind of going, what am I supposed to actually say? Like, who am I? Why am I doing this? Why do I care? Whatever. So, yeah, I get that, certainly. And they're games I just kind of tend to avoid because I need time to kind of plan and rehearse and really get into that mood. And I never, ever get the chance to actually do that, right? So I think I could enjoy those games if I played them enough times to understand them, and that has just never happened, and I don't see that ever happening. So I get that one as well. And lastly, Red Panda shared a story of him and his wife attending a game meetup where there were no games currently available to join. So they set up a 5-player game and waited for 45 minutes for anyone to show up. They ended up playing by just themselves, still had no games available to join, and ended up leaving, adding, "We haven't been to a meetup since." That story kind of bummed me out. And I certainly, I have seen that. I have had almost that exact same thing happen to me. I've been to some local gaming events, sort of smaller meetups, but with, 70, 80 people there maybe. And I have felt like a lot of times you end up with kind of cliques. People just kind of, they sit with their friends. They just play game after game after game with those people. There's not really a chance for other folks to join in. And folks who maybe come by themselves or just come as maybe a couple end up playing on their own, which they could have just easily have done at home. And so, yeah, it becomes a very uncomfortable situation for those kind of smaller groups or people who sort of show up on their own. The only thing I can say, and this is in no way, argumentative or anything like that, but timing is really key, I think, for a lot of those elements. So if it starts at 3 o'clock, get there at like 2:45, 2:50, if at all you can. And of course, I realize that's not always an option. So I understand that. But I know friends. I have friends in the area. Chris, my buddy Chris is one of those who he'll get there ahead of time. He'll have a game set up. Like, hey, I'm playing this. Do you want to join? I can immediately teach you and we can be playing. As I often feel like that's better than you get a bunch of people standing around going, what do you want to play? Well, I mean, I brought these. You want to block? I brought these. Like, and that's everything is. And again, I'm not saying that Red Panda did this or didn't do this or whatever, but in general, if you're going to those game meetups, either kind of plan to bring some games or plan to literally just, I'm going to go and play whatever I can find. I'm just going to sit down at the table and I'm going to play something and do that with authority, right? Like, oh, yep, that sounds good. I'm going to sit there. I'm taking this seat. I'm going to play this. I don't care who else shows up. I'm going to just sit and play this. But yeah, I have been there. I have done some events where you're kind of sitting there going, there's nothing to do. I'm not going to just sit here and wait for all these long games to end and hope that someone's going to then walk over and join. So I'm just going to leave. I'm going to head home. And it's definitely frustrating. So that kind of bummed me out to see that because I know how that can go. I've already talked about a couple of my own game nights that have gone a little as unexpected, and having played in so many of those meetups and retreats and such like that, where you just kind of have anything can happen, and sometimes you just kind of have to roll with it. And sometimes you just go, you know what? I'm going to go home and have a beer and watch some TV. So that can happen too. Let's go ahead and talk about some games that I have played recently. All right, staying awake. I'm still with it. I'm just trying to find the energy here. But I got a couple of games in this past week, as I mentioned, and the first one has gotten heavier and heavier. This is Wyrmspan, and this is with the Dragon Academy expansion. I mentioned this one coming in not too long ago, actually maybe even just last episode, I think is when this one showed up. And I have everything into here, so I'm just going to go ahead and toss that box out of the way. Wyrmspan, of course, is a spiritual successor to the game of Wingspan, but I do feel like they play just different enough that I really enjoy this one a lot more than Wingspan. Wingspan is, I think, more about sort of setting up an engine and trying to run that engine as efficiently as you possibly can, trying to, visit the sort of 3 nesting areas that you have, these rows of cards that you're going to be building into a tableau to those cards may let you get more cards or get more resources or do things like that, which you're also doing here. But I do feel like there's a little bit more in trying to advance up. There's an extra track in this game. There's a guild track that you're kind of spinning around this circular track on, which is going to give you extra rewards, give you extra benefits, even end-game scoring opportunities, all kinds of things. And this game is also about that efficiency and a little bit about that engine. But for me, what I really enjoy with this one is that you can get extra actions throughout the game to give you more things to do. And so you're kind of trying to plan around actions that give you these coins back, basically an action that becomes free because you take the action, and then as a result of that, you get a coin that will then let you take an additional action. So I really do like this game. I quite enjoy this one. The Dragon Academy. So I'll talk kind of specifically about that. It adds just a few things. In fact, I was really surprised at just how little was in that box, although it didn't really seem to be all that expensive. It adds fledgling dragons. Now, these are sort of the next level up of the hatchling. So the base game had hatchling dragons, and then, of course, adult dragons that come in small, medium, and large sizes. The rulebook kind of explains that these fledglings they're kind of like teenagers, and they have to be trained on how to be a dragon. Yes, we're again kind of leaning into this how to train a dragon theme that we sort of see snuck into a lot of different games like Dragon Keepers and some of those other titles. But the idea is that each of these dragons has a little track on the bottom of that card, and when you visit that dragon, you have to be able to discard whatever is next on that track. So it might be a resource, it might be a card, and I think those are mostly what I saw in this. And if you're able to discard that item, you put a little cube on that spot on that track. You only get to do 1 cube per visit. When you finally fill that track, it then unlocks the next row of that card, which is either an additional action you can take when you visit that dragon, or it might be endgame scoring, maybe even an ongoing effect, something like that, that then kind of becomes available to you. Now, the dragons themselves, those fledglings themselves, they score with kind of like an exponential system. So each dragon is going to give you a point for every fledgling dragon that you have. So you have 1, you have 1 point. You have 2, you have 4 points. 3 would be 9 points, so on and so forth. And that was kind of nice. The problem being, of course, that you quickly run into deck saturation. You'll see, I believe, in this one photo I have, it was just kind of a candid photo I sent to a friend of mine, but they added another 80 dragon cards to the already massive deck of cards in this game. And so, you know, you could probably play a game of this and rarely, if ever, see any of these new fledgling cards actually come out into play. Some of them are also quite hard to train. They just take a lot of resources, which means they require a lot of visits. And if those cards come out later in the game, it's almost pointless to try and take them unless you at least already have a bunch. They do score whether or not you finish training them. So it may be just worthwhile to grab that card, knowing that you're not going to be able to use it for its ability, but maybe it's just going to add an extra slew of points to your endgame score because you already have a couple of these fledgling dragons in play. It did also add a system where when you pass at the end of each round, when you've run out of actions to take, instead of just passing and being done, you actually pick a spot on these little tracks at the bottom of a replacement round tracker board, and these sort of change up the benefits that you can get at the end of each round. So instead of just getting the default 6 coins, 6 action coins, which I think is all you get from round to round in the base game, you might get 5 coins and maybe an egg, or 5 coins and any resource. And then when you pass in the third round, the penultimate round, you get a slightly better benefit. There's a second half of this track, and everyone will pick one of those rewards instead. And that was basically it. Like I said, a couple of new cards in general, a couple of new cave cards, and then there were also a whole bunch of additional guild tiles. So I mentioned that guild track. Each card that sits in the middle of that track is unique. I think the base game only came with maybe 3 of them, and this expansion added 5 more. And so that was just nice to have some extra variety in that. This is one of those expansions where do I think you absolutely need it? Maybe not. I did like, again, the variety of these guild cards. That was probably one of the things that I was most interested in, was just having some additional variety in those cards, and those tiles, I should say, these different guilds, although they're not wildly different from tile to tile anyways. I mean, it's endgame scoring. It's maybe getting yourself a little bonus when you hit the sort of 12 and 6 o'clock positions on this guild track. You're going to be able to place a cube on that tile specific to that guild. And again, that can give you some benefits. That can give you, in one case, there was an example where, or a reward where instead of paying to train a dragon, you could put a cube on it. You basically got a free training of one of your fledglings, but then you actually got the reward where you place that cube instead of spending one. And I actually managed to time it just right to do that on a training cost, which was an action coin. So instead of spending an action coin to train that dragon its final spot, I actually gained one, again, turning that action into a free one because I got to then take another action. And so I enjoyed that. I enjoyed, that sort of puzzle and the timing and trying to get things to fire off just right. Is it incredibly essential? I wouldn't say so. I also don't think there's any reason to play the game without it. I don't see any reason why you'd ever have to pull these things back out. The additional learning or rules teach of the expansion was very minimal, and so it was not hard to wrap our head around that extra little bit of it and play it. You did kind of have that thing where, okay, I have 2 rule books, I gotta check and remember, wait, where is this symbol on this card? Is that from the base game or the expansion? I can't remember, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So I did have fun playing Wyrmspan with the new Dragon Academy expansion. Up next, this is a game that has been sitting on my shelf of shame for quite some time. My buddy Daniel came over and we played Excavation Earth. This is from Mighty Boards. Designer of this is David Terzi, and I believe there are 2 other designers credited with this, Wei Yi and Gordon Kaleja. Not entirely sure, but this is I don't exactly know how to explain this. It is a set collection game, essentially. You are collecting these tiles of different colors, sort of different suits, and each one has a slightly different value, and they're going to be drawn out onto this map of the Earth, which is, at this point, uninhabited. You are an alien race that has discovered or sort of, been part of the discovery of this abandoned planet Earth after some sort of a, cataclysmic event has wiped out all life on the planet. And these aliens are discovering sort of leftover ancient artifacts from the human society. And it's a lot of junk, it's car wheels and old license plates and, a skillet or stuff like that. But of course, to this alien race, these are extremely valuable artifacts. And so you're trying to find these things. Each one sort of has a different rarity level, and so of course that makes the value of them a little higher in the game. And you're doing all of this by using multi-use cards. And the idea of this is that you're going around to different locations. You have sort of 3 pawns, they're workers, and you're moving them along this board, along these routes that you hopefully can see in some of these photos. And you're excavating some of these items. These items will always come out in the same place, but you never know what's going to come out or when. So you're excavating these items, you're collecting them onto your player board. There is this idea that when you collect them, you put a little cube on this little track on your player board, not track, but a grid on your player board, because you're kind of keeping a little specimen. You're keeping like a little artifact of some kind from that overall artifact, which again is kind of weird. But you're putting the cubes on this grid, and at the end of the game, you're going to collect points for each row and column of the collection that you finish. So if you get all of the rare items or all the common items across all the different suits, or if you collect one of each of the suits, if you get every item in that suit collected, you're going to get some extra in-game points. The way that you do all that, and so, you're collecting this stuff, but then you're also selling this stuff. So you have to go to these different markets. There is this idea that almost like a conveyor system, there are different buyers that are hitting these 6 different markets across the top of this board. And based on their color, you're going to know what things are popular to try and sell in each of those markets. So again, there may be a bunch of red buyers and white, which is a wild color, buyers in a particular market. So you know that if you sell some red items, you're going to possibly be able to get a lot of money. And so a lot of the game is actually manipulating the markets, trying to get the buyers out who want the colors of tiles that you have been able to excavate or purchase through the black market or find via other ways. You can kind of survey to sort of force some of those items of particular colors into play. But then you're manipulating the market, trying to not only get the buyers in place, but you also have to get your own agents into those markets. And what you find is that you only get 6 cards at the beginning of each round. And there's only 3 rounds in the game. You also have a couple of cards that allow you to make movement with your workers. And that's all that card lets you do, is you're just kind of moving your guys around. And then you're going to be playing these cards to either put buyers in the market or put your agents in those markets, or manipulate the value of those markets, etc. And so it's a lot of really, really careful timing, but also, of course, that requires getting the cards that you need when you need them. So these cards have colors that, of course, relate to the suits of these items. They also have symbols that represent the 6 different markets. And so you can either use the card for its color effect to excavate these items, or you can use it for its market symbol to let you put the buyers and your agents out in those markets. And all that is nice, it's fine, but it really comes down to, especially in the beginning of each round, you actually do a draft between all the players. Of course, we played this just 2-player, and I get my 8 cards, you're drafting 6 of the 8 cards, Daniel gets his, and we quickly realize amongst the 2 of our hands, we only have 1 blue card, right? And so one person's going to get that card. There are no other cards. There is not sort of that brass Birmingham system where you can get rid of a card to use it as, or get a wild card. Now, there is an expansion. There are a couple expansions in this game, and I sort of read through them, but I was like, look, there's enough for me to juggle here already with this that we didn't really add them in. But I did use one module from the first expansion, which adds a wild colored card. Each player gets one of these cards. It can be used as any color, but only as one of the markets, and that card then gets sort of spent, and there is an action, I believe it's called the command action, where you can potentially reclaim that card in lieu of getting another benefit that the command action was already kind of built to provide. And I know it's a lot of word salad from a somewhat tired YouTuber, but I did enjoy this. What was really kind of interesting with this game is that I played it back in 2021 with my friends Katie and Greg, who I had barely just gotten to meet at that event. This is maybe our second game that we had played together. And so I kind of knew them. I'd kind of keyed into their sense of humor and was kind of, yucking it up and having some fun. But when we actually got into the game, I really had no idea what I was doing. This was, at that time, a little above my skill level, at least to be able to kind of pick up and run with well. I haven't touched it since then. I did buy it maybe a year or so ago. It's been sitting on my shelf unplayed ever since. And so it was really, really interesting to come back and visit this game with a very, very different perspective on gaming in general. I was able to approach this with a much more mathematical, much more strategic approach, sort of looking at every card I had and sort of figuring out that path. Okay, this is going to let me set up this situation. Then I want to move so I can set up this situation. And then I'm going to have all these things in place, watching what Daniel was doing and sort of trying to make sure that I wasn't clashing with what he was going to do. And there were even some times, especially in that third round, where I said, okay, I kind of looked, I didn't say, but I saw that he had certain markets set up to capitalize on. And I could have either wrecked him and changed the desire of that market. But instead, I saw that if he went ahead and took his action, yeah, he was going to get a couple of dollars, but he was actually going to leave some workers out there that then I could add to in a way that would actually give me more points than if I had sort of cycled. Again, it was like a conveyor belt of these buyers. So you're bumping off old buyers to add new buyers. But the old buyers who were there were of a color that I had. So I wanted to actually leave that buyer in place, give him a chance to make the sale, clean out the newer buyers of a color that he was working on, and then add to the existing older buyer that was already there to give myself an even bigger sale. And that was kind of nice. Some other trade-offs, though, I felt was that it took a long time to set some of these bigger sales up. And that is the idea of this, is that if you can sell to multiple markets, you get a much bigger reward. But of course, doing that takes a lot of timing and having the right cards. And we were talking about it afterwards that I couldn't imagine trying to play this really at more than 3 players. It only goes up to 4. But then trying to sort of analyze what everyone else is doing, you'd have a much, much greater chance in sort of bumping into what someone else is trying to do. We're both trying to sell to the same buyer. And then timing becomes even more critical, and you don't know what cards, of course, obviously your opponent has in their hands. And so you may be kind of forced to take a less optimal sale to try and beat them to that sale, because, of course, if they take it before you, they're going to clear out all the buyers that you were hoping to cash in on. So I think that for me, especially, I think 2 players is probably the right way to play this if you want some more of that thinkiness, but maybe a lot more randomness, maybe a little bit more chaos to the engine. This probably plays in that sense in the higher player counts. At 2 players, I felt like I could be a little bit more calculative. I could kind of, again, watch things and time things to either, beat Daniel to the punch or wait until I could do a stronger action after he took, whatever he was working towards. Anyways, it was really, really nice to get to revisit this. It was really nice to, again, get to see this with a more learned pair of eyes, if you will. And this is before I, drove for 5 hours until 3 in the morning. So this went pretty well. Had a good time with this. I'm hoping we can actually revisit this. Daniel did get a little flustered because it does take such careful planning. And he just felt like he didn't sort of grasp that system until a little too late in the game. And so it wasn't a total blowout, but I did win that with a decent margin. And he's like, yeah, I'd like to revisit this before too long, when he can kind of remember, okay, yeah, now I think I understand how it works. And maybe then we can add in a couple of the expansions. They don't add a ton of stuff. They're very modular in how they sort of add into the game. And so maybe we'll get to do that here before too long. All right. The next game that I played, that was, by the way, Excavation Earth. The next game that I played, this is Storyfold Wildwoods. I mentioned this one also very recently came in, and I don't know if this is relaunching the Kickstarter. I actually need to find out, because I do know that this is a Kickstarter that delivered. Now, there is a deluxe edition. That is not what I have, which is fine. This is a review copy, so I don't know if they're relaunching this and kind of wanted me to, plug it, do a video on it. This is a solo-only, story-driven game. Now, Very, very quickly, I could get into spoilers here, although I will say I only played the prologue and the first chapter. I won't reveal anything from that, and I don't believe I have any significant photos that might spoil things. There might be a couple pictures of things that you'll see in that first chapter. The prologue is only basically a training thing. So if you're very, very interested in this and do not want any spoilers, then you might want to go ahead and skip to the next segment. But of course, again, you're going to see what I would show you very, very early in your playthrough. And I don't think you'll see enough there that really, you're not going to see any story. You may just see a couple of cards that can kind of come out. This is also going to be very difficult to explain without going into a tremendous amount of detail, even as it is. And I don't want to do that for time's sake, if nothing else. But the general story here, this is kind of a science fantasy story of a young girl named Luna. I don't remember. Luma. Okay. And she has a bear named Brahm, a very large bear who she is able to speak to. And, you know, they're kind of friends and buddies, kind of like a Winnie the Pooh sort of a style idea. But she lives across the river from a forest, a large forest where creepy, strange things involving shadows are taking place. And I don't know anything more than that. So that is explained, I think, even right here in the back of the box to some extent. So I'm not giving anything away. But the whole idea is that you're playing through this story. There's a number of chapters. Each chapter takes place over multiple scenes. The scenes are revolved in a spiral-bound notebook that you kind of flip through page at a time. And then you're going to have sort of the wings of this booklet that fold out, and they're going to give you sort of places to store your cards, store your decks, and sort of manage the way that the game itself plays. Each page, each scene of this booklet is going to have a number of locations that you can kind of activate. And so you're going to have a certain number of locations that you can sort of search or explore. I think explore is the name of the action, and you have to take them in a specific order. But then there are also other things that you can do. There may be other animals that you can help or other actions that you can use to then interact with the actual scene in front of you. But you have 4 core actions. I don't remember all their names, but there was a light, a heal, an explore, and a help. Actually, I think that was the 4. Each of these actions has a sort of a primary ability and a secondary ability, in that if you do not pass or succeed in the primary ability, you can then use the secondary ability, or you can just use the secondary ability sort of on purpose, if you will, to try and get things done. There are a number of tracks. There is a spirit track that will decline as certain things happen to you. Sort of you lose your spirit, you lose your, your ambition or whatever to proceed through the story. And when that track bottoms out, something bad happens. Usually a negative story card will come out, which can even just cause you to fail that chapter. There is also a light and dark track in the middle of the main scene board. And it has a middle point, and your light marker and your darkness marker are sort of marching towards the center space on this track. When the darkness token reaches that center spot, you just automatically fail. But a lot of the scenes or the chapters themselves, or the scenes of these chapters, will require you to have that light marker in the center to then proceed with the success trigger. So just getting that light marker to the middle isn't enough. You need to get it there and then trigger the event or explore the location, whatever it may be, that lets you win that scene and move on to the next scene. You're doing all of this. You're taking these actions with these 4 spots on the bottom of this booklet. And it's a little bit of an Arc Nova system, but with a twist, in that when you take an action, it then slides to the end of that track. You can have up to 7 cards in front of you, and I'll explain that in a moment. The 4 in front of you, the 4 main ones, have a value above them, a 3+, all the way up to 6+. 6+? 3, 4, 5, 6, yes. You have a bunch of D8 dice. So when you pick an action, let's say it's in the 4+ slot, the second slot, when you take that action, you're then going to roll as many of the dice that you have that you want. So you may have, I think you start off with 5 dice, maybe 6. And you can add some extra dice, possibly. And I say extra, you might get 1 or 2 more. But you can roll as many of your available dice as you want, and you're trying to hit, in that case, a 4 or higher to get a success. So if you're doing a location on the board, it may tell you that you need 1, 2, or 3, or even up to 5 successes. And I say 5, that's as much as I've seen so far. Or you may just begin trying to trigger the secondary action of the card, which basically says for each success, you get to do something, which might be moving up that light marker, trying to replenish some of your spirit, or even trying to heal these animals. And I'll come right back to that in a second. So again, you're taking an action, and depending on where it sits on that track is how difficult it's going to be to get those successes, because you have to have higher and higher numbers, and the lowest it gets to is a 3+. So you're always going to need, at least for now, a 3 or higher to succeed at something, and then that card moves you on the track. Now, I mentioned creatures. Throughout this game, creatures are coming out, and as long as they're on that track, you can, I'm assuming, consider them to be a bad creature, a creature that has been inhabited or is being controlled in some way by this shadow, this sort of evil spirit that is, affecting this forest. And those creatures are going to sit out here in your deck. And sometimes they're going to move to the right. They're going to kind of get out of the way. But a lot of them I've seen already push themselves to the left, and other game effects might push them to the left. And so they're going to eventually start clogging up the 4 spots on your board where you are then able to take these actions. You never trigger an animal. You trigger the animal at the end of each of your rounds when you play as Luma. So you're going to use all your dice, and then the shadow gets to take a turn, and that's when you activate all these animals, which again usually have some negative consequences. They may affect your spirit, they may move themselves around the track, they may bring out additional animals. Again, just things to thwart your efforts to stop the shadow. And what I found very quickly in my first playthrough, after I got through the prologue, is that these animals just kept clogging up this action deck, and you only have 4 spots. You have 4 spots of actions to take, but 7 spots for cards to go in, which means you can add up to 3 of these infected animals, and then your track is full. If you would take on more animals, it affects your spirit, and the animal just gets discarded. And so a couple of times I found myself, again, there's only 4 action slots that you can actually activate, but I had animals in 3 of them, and because they kept pushing to the left, I only had one action card on the right side of this track that I could activate, and I had to roll 6s or higher to have any successes. One of those cards is to heal those animals and get them out of that track. But if that card is in the right 3 slots of that track, you cannot activate it. You can't do anything with it. Now, you can get these gems you get to put on these cards, and it's just a cardboard token. I don't know if there's a deluxe resource in the deluxe edition of the game. But you can get these crystals that then act as a success. So you can roll the dice for the card. It doesn't succeed, or you don't get as many successes as you want. You can then spend gems from that card. They have to already be on that card to then give yourself some extra successes. And you get those gems through a couple of ways throughout the game, but you're typically going to get them by healing those animals. They will then give you gems. And I know at this point, we're starting to get pretty deep into the fantasy setting of this game, and it starts to sound a little weird to just explain it, but I felt like, so I played the game, I played the prologue, and real quick I'll mention that the prologue gives you a deck of cards, and it's a fairly thick deck of cards you get through in that prologue, and it literally teaches you the game 1 card at a time, and each card is 2-sided, and it's going to just tell you, okay, here you do this, and this is why this happens, and here's how you resolve this. That was okay, except that I constantly just keep flipping to the next card. The card's kind of small. They're kind of small print. They're kind of, I'm trying to look at everything else on the board while moving this card around. It was kind of in the way. And that was, like I said, it was kind of okay. I didn't really like it, but on the same token, I did like the fact that it basically walked me through the game a little bit more hands-on than just a rulebook would. Until I had a question on something. Wait, how does that work again? Or when does this trigger? Or what do I do with that card again? And then I had to go backwards through the cards, 2-sided cards, to try and find where that thing was explained. And that part I did not care for at all. Now, it does give you a rules reference booklet, but it's not organized in at all the same way as those cards were. And I couldn't always find the answer in the little booklet. as it was explained in the cards. And so that was a bit frustrating. A lot of people have applauded that prologue system. I found it as someone who was literally used to and quite often pours through a rule book. I did not really care for this card system. I would have maybe preferred to just have a prologue booklet that I could read. It would still walk me through it, but then I could kind of quickly, a little easier get back and try and find the information I was looking for. So after the prologue, you then get thrown into the first chapter. Now you're on your own. Okay, have at it. And again, I was like, okay, well, I just did the prologue. Hopefully it's fresh in my mind. But if things got a little fuzzy, it was harder to go and find the answers I was looking for. And I boffed that first chapter quite bad. I failed it, got knocked out, whatever, because I just very quickly got my deck clogged up with those cards. And for example, when I played played through the prologue, it told you, okay, no matter what you do when you roll, just keep re-rolling until you succeed. You can't do that in the actual game. And every time I would roll, as many dice as it would tell me to roll, I would get enough successes to succeed in whatever it was telling me to do. And I was like, man, these dice are great. I'm having lots of good luck. And then chapter 1 comes along and I'm rolling 1s or 2s just constantly failing every, attempt that I made to proceed with the story. And that very quickly became frustrating, obviously, and I lost that attempt. I, had a little sulk, kind of went and read through the rules a little bit more, checked some stuff online, came back to it, did succeed the first chapter. But I still felt like it was very, very swingy. I felt like it really just came down to the dice rolls. There is a little bit of manipulation of that deck. You get a couple of these, they're called boon cards that you can possibly explore for. It's one of the secondary abilities of one of the cards, and sometimes a reward of a location out on the scenario booklet. And you can get some of these cards, and they may give you a benefit. Okay, just discard this card to reroll dice. Discard this card to just take an animal out of the deck. Discard a card to move an animal to the bottom of the track so it gets out of your way. And that makes everything slide to the left, and all of a sudden that card that you want to do is now 1 pip easier on the dice, right? But I had a couple times it says, well, draw a couple of these explore cards and keep one. And all the ones that I drew were negative effect cards. They were bane cards. And again, certain things may cause these banes to come out and give you some sort of a penalty or a punishment or whatever. And so there were a couple times I was like, I don't want any of these. And now what do I do? Can I just not take one? It says draw a couple and choose one to keep. I don't want to keep any of these. What are my options? Again, no explanation in the rules. So I don't know. I'm seeing a lot of positive feedback for this game online. I didn't really feel like I had a whole ton of agency. The only thing you can do is you can use as many dice as you want to try and hit, your number of successes. But of course, the moment you run out of your dice, then the sort of enemy, this enemy spirit, whatever it is, I don't know, takes its turn. And every time it takes its turn, it marches that nighttime or darkness or shadow marker up to that center spot of the track. And again, the moment it hits, you fail that scenario. So you only get a couple of rounds to succeed at whatever that scenario wants you to do. You can't just kind of take your time and roll all the dice that you want to try and hit those successes. You've got to kind of penny pinch and hope that the luck is going to roll your way. And if it doesn't, you're going to be replaying the scenario. And that aspect of it is not really what I'd like to see in a solo game. I want to have a lot more agency. I want to sort of be able to, build up and sort of get better at things. I didn't really feel like this game let you do that. Those little benefits from those boon cards were very short-lived. They didn't have a drastic effect on things. They may give you one really good roll, and then you're back to square one. You're back to just being, sort of a victim of the dice. So I don't know how I feel about this one, except for that I just didn't really love it. I didn't love the fact that it was very, very dependent upon the dice. The story is kind of interesting. Again, a lot of people are really, raving about the story. I kind of felt that it was ho-hum. If you're really into that fantasy setting of, like I said, sort of a girl and her Winnie the Pooh, maybe you'll find something here. I'm hoping it will get more interesting. I'm going to try and play a little bit more through this. I might just kind of have to wing it and just assume I'm going to succeed everything so I can kind of get through the story so I can try and put together a video on it. Of course, a spoiler-free one in that instance. But anyways, that was Storyfold Wildwoods. Okay, these next two games, I promise I will get through a lot quicker. I know those last 2 or so I talked about for a long time. We went back to Cask and Stave, our little speakeasy over the weekend. My wife and I tried to do another game night. No one else showed up, so it was just the 2 of us. Right, that's how it goes. But we played BOOoop. This is the Halloween edition of BOOoop. And I've talked about this a couple of times. But BOOoop is a very abstract game where you're trying to simply put out kittens and cats, and you're trying to get a row of 3 kittens or cats onto this 6x6 grid, which is actually this really nice cloth. Kind of looks like a bedspread, and I'm not going to turn this upside down, but the box actually sort of shows the bedspread. So imagine this upside down. And you can put the bedspread on the bottom of the box, flip it over, and it even has a duvet kind of illustrated in here. And you're putting the cats onto this bedspread. You're trying to put kittens next to kittens, trying to get 3 in a row. However, when you place kittens, they boop other kittens. They spook the other kittens, playfully, whatever, as it did in the base game. And you put a kitten down, and any kittens next to it hop a space away, orthogonally or diagonally. But you're trying to get 3 kittens in a row. If you do, they sort of graduate into cats. They come off the board. You replace the kitten tokens with cat tokens. And then what you're ultimately trying to do is get 3 cats in a row. Now, cats will boop cats or kittens. Kittens cannot boop cats because they're way too mature for that kind of stuff. And that was the base game. Now, in the Halloween expansion, it adds ghost cats, and these sit on the seams between the squares of this bedspread. At the end of one of your normal turns, you can choose to put your ghost token, you only have one of them, onto one seam at the edge of one of the 4 edges of this bedspread. And then at the end of all of your future turns, it will move 1 space along that seam, spooking any cats that are immediately adjacent to it. At that point, diagonals do not trigger. And it's just going to keep moving across that mat until it falls off the other end. And then on your next turn, you can choose to put it out again. And that's it. That's really the only variant of this game from the base game to this sort of Halloween edition. The neat thing is that it'll actually boop cats over other cats. That was something that doesn't happen in the base game, so it actually it has more effect if you have 2 cats side by side. Of course, as I said, it doesn't work on diagonals. It does work on any cat or kitten, and it doesn't matter whose player color it is. I saw some potential for this to allow for clever moves. If you can kind of set yourself up in a way that, okay, I'm going to put this cat here, and I'm going to go ahead and deploy my ghost, knowing that in a few turns it's going to spook that cat, and I'm going to try and make it do that in a way that's going to create a 3 in a row that maybe my opponent won't see coming. However, because of the sort of volatile and nature of this game, the fact that you can put a cat down and just sends cats moving in all these different directions, it's very hard to actually make that stick. It's very hard to say, okay, here's a scenario I'm going to try and create, and it's actually going to happen 2 or 3 turns later, even if your opponent doesn't see it coming, even if they just kind of randomly put something out there and it completely wrecks what you were trying to do. And it actually happened to us in basically what ended up being the last turn of the game. My wife put out a cat. I was, again, trying to set up this sneaky sort of 3 in a row combo. She sent everything scurrying away in different directions, but set up another 2 in a row that I just had to add to. Because if you're adding a cat onto the end of 2 existing cats, they don't boop. They're kind of locked in place. Again, the ghost lets you ignore that, but a regular play does not. And so she blocked my one attempt at a clever win and just gave me a much easier, oh, well, then I just win like this. A couple things. I mean, the game is adorable. I don't think that this Halloween version really needs to be out there. I think if you have the base game, you're fine. I do think that the BOOoop the Halls, the Christmas edition, is way more thinky because it is I think it's a 5x5 that kind of expands to a 7x7, but without corners. And so it's a way more unique play area. And I don't just mean the sort of gimmicky 3-dimension tree aspect of that game. There are just other things that sort of get set up in that game that really makes it play very unique to the first 2 versions of this. But I still really wish that they had done this as a little mini expansion, a $5 expansion that would add maybe puppies that would, same thing, run along those creases, which I think makes a lot of sense for a puppy to, just come bolting across the bed and scare all the cats out of the way. I think I even would have liked it if it ran through it all in one shot. If you just, the ghost or the puppy just zipped right through that bedspread and spooked everything at the same time, you could create some really, really interesting combos by letting that happen. So it felt slower, a little more plodding, and again, way more random because of just how slowly all this kind of comes into play. I had fun with it. I've always had fun with BOOoop. I just never really felt like this version really needed to exist. And I will say that in our one playthrough, my mind wasn't really changed about that. So anyways, that is BOOoop. I still talked too long about that one. Last game we played that night was a quick game of Harmonies. I do believe I've talked about this before. It has been a while. This was a very, very popular game maybe about a year ago. I kind of felt like it has fallen off the radar for a lot of folks, but every once in a while it still pops up on some social media. This is a game, a very abstract game, where you're placing out these tiles onto a board, these kind of round, chunky wooden tiles, and you're trying to set up certain patterns of these tiles to then attract animals. These animals are represented by simply little yellow cubes that come out on these cards that you're drafting from the central display. That card tells you what the arrangement of tiles has to be to then be able to take one of those yellow cubes off the card and place it onto your environment that you've set up in front of you, with the simple caveat being that once you have placed an animal into or onto a specific tile, you then cannot add any more to that tile. And that's basically it. At the end of the game, you're going to score for the setup of your tiles themselves. Those little tokens that come out onto your board. There's mountains and trees and houses and rivers. You can either create the longest river on one side of the board, or you can try to segment a large island into smaller islands on the other side of the board, which is what we finally played as. We've never used that side of the board before, and so we finally wanted to try that one out. And then you're also going to score for the animals that you've put out. So every animal that you remove from that card becomes worth more and more points. That card itself will score you a number of points based on the highest number that you have uncovered by putting those animals into your sort of tableau. A couple things on this one. I still don't think it's really great at 2, because at 2 players, that market of cards gets very stale. If there's a bunch of cards out there that just none of you are anywhere close to being able to work on, they just sit there and no one drafts them anymore. And so my wife and I have kind of added this house rule where if you both agree there's nothing good out there, you will then agree on which card to get rid of. One per turn. And we kind of add that as an extra action. Yes, we do kind of play it sort of a Care Bear mode, if you will, in that we don't hate draft. Like, oh, this is good for you, I'm going to get rid of it. We both have to kind of agree that, yeah, I'm not going to even try and work on that card, just get rid of it. And that's just kind of the way that we choose to play it. You could certainly make it more mean if you would like to. But that kind of keeps the market moving at least a little bit more. We only had to do that once in this game. There's only one card that we got rid of, and then we were able to kind of keep things moving from there. The other thing that just blew my mind with this game was that there was a rule that I was getting very, very wrong. Remember in the previous episode about playing a game many times and then realizing you've been playing it wrong. There's one mandatory and 2 optional actions in this game. You must every round take 3 of those tokens off of this drafting board, kind of a Zool style in the middle of the table, and put them into your tableau. You have to take them and you have to put all 3 of them into your tableau. Optionally, you can take one of those cards from the market, and optionally, you can place an animal from a card into your tableau. Now, I thought, as it clearly says, place 1 animal into your tableau. And then underneath it, kind of smaller print, it says you can do this as many times as you want. I forgot that. Okay, not a big deal. But then I also didn't catch that it said you can do this at any point on your turn, which means you can draft those 3 tiles from the central board, put one of them into your board, which maybe creates a certain scenario for one of your animals, place that animal, and then go on and continue to place the tokens that you drafted, which may then change that scenario to no longer be applicable for that animal. Again, you cannot place a token on top of an animal, But let's say you need to have a two height mountain next to a water tile. And when you do that, you then can place an animal on the water tile. And then you can place another mountain on top of that mountain tile in the same turn. I knew that you could change it later, but I didn't know you could do it in the middle of a turn. Deploy any number of these animals. And that was just, again, sort of mind-blowing in what opportunities that kind of creates. Still maybe a little difficult to pull off, but it really does, I think, change up the sort of strategic play, just that again, that sort of calculative, manipulative, whatever you want to call it, nature of this, to go, okay, I can time this just right and grab these and put that thing there, put out a whole bunch of animals, and then finish off in a way that maybe lets me then put another animal out where I couldn't have done it a moment ago. Like, holy crap, it could really add quite a lot of strategic play to this game. I cannot believe that I missed that. I think I watched a video that maybe did not explain that clearly. I'm not exactly sure how I had that in my mind. I also had it in my mind that you had to take cards from that market before you could place any animals out, which meant that if you already had the limit of 4 cards in front of you, you could not place an animal out to clear out a card and then draft your next card in the same turn. And in fact, you can. So that was really, really interesting. Do I think it completely like makes this game amazingly incredible? Everyone must have it? No. But it's a nice puzzle. I think it's fine. I think its popularity was a bit overblown, but still a nice, simple little abstract game, Harmonies. And that is it for the 79th episode of the Weekly Ratchet, which I did not mention at the beginning of this. I do have a question of the week. I need to find it, and here it is. How do you feel about new versions of a not very old board game? I've seen this quite a bit coming across Kickstarter lately, and even in retail. We are seeing second editions, third editions of games that came out a year ago. And it's, for some folks who maybe back the game, maybe have a lot of money into it, all of a sudden you're seeing a game that looks really, really, really similar, has a lot of the same components, the same look, but it's a new game. What do you think about that practice in our hobby? That's it for the episode, folks. Thank you for watching. I might go take a power nap. We're going to see how the rest of this day goes. But thanks as always for your comments and your feedback and your participation. I love hearing from you, and I will chat with you again very soon. Cheers. Do I look like I know what I'm doing? Does this, like, am I cool now? Crushed it.